I'm Camila Brooks, 28, and I thought grief was the hardest thing I'd ever face. My husband David died in a car accident when I was 8 months pregnant, leaving me shattered, alone, and about to bring his child into the world without him. But, as I went into labor that cold December night, I discovered that losing him was just the beginning of my nightmare. His family had been planning something unthinkable, and when I returned home with our newborn daughter, I found the locks changed. And strangers in my house. What happened next would expose the truth about my in-laws, and change everything I thought I knew about the family I'd married into. Before we jump back in, tell me where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribe, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. If you've ever felt abandoned in your darkest hour, you'll understand why this story needs to be told. Like this video if you believe in finding strength in the face of betrayal. 3 years ago, I was a different person entirely. I had just landed my dream job as a senior graphic designer at a boutique marketing firm in downtown Portland, and life felt full of possibility. That's when I met David Brooks at a coffee shop. On a rainy Thursday morning, he was sitting alone, sketching architectural plans, his dark hair falling across his forehead as he worked with intense concentration. "Excuse me," I said, approaching his table with my laptop bag. "Is this seat taken?" He looked up, and I was struck by the warmth in his brown eyes. "Not at all, please sit." What started as a shared table became a 3-hour conversation. David was an architect, passionate about sustainable design and community planning. He talked about buildings the way I talked about visual storytelling, with reverence and excitement. There was something magnetic about his quiet confidence, the way he listened intently when I spoke about my work. "I design spaces where people can truly live," he said, gesturing with his coffee cup. "Not just exist, but actually build their lives." I found myself thinking about that phrase for days after our first meeting. When he called 3 days later asking if I wanted to grab dinner, I said yes without hesitation. Our courtship was beautifully ordinary. David would pick me up after work, and we'd walk through the city, talking about everything and nothing. He introduced me to his passion for old buildings, pointing out architectural details I'd never noticed. I showed him how design could tell stories, how colors and typography could evoke emotion. 6 months in, he brought me to meet his family. The Brooks family lived in a sprawling Victorian house in the suburbs, the kind of place that screamed old money and tradition. Patricia Brooks, David's mother, was impeccably dressed, with steel grey hair and sharp blue eyes that seemed to catalogue every detail about me. "So you're the artist David's been telling us about," she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Graphic designer," I corrected gently. "Of course." "How lovely." David's father, Robert, was warmer but distant, clearly deferring to his wife in all social matters. David's younger brother, Marcus, seemed nice enough, though I noticed he watched his mother's reactions carefully before offering his own opinions. The family dinner was formal china plates, multiple courses, conversation that felt like a performance. Patricia asked pointed questions about my background, my family, my career prospects. I answered honestly, mentioning that I'd grown up in a working-class family, that I'd put myself through college. "How admirable," Patricia said, though her tone suggested otherwise. "Self-made success is so inspiring." Later, as David drove me home, I mentioned feeling like I was being interviewed for a position. "Mum's just protective," he said, reaching over to squeeze my hand. "She'll warm up to you. How could she not?" I wanted to believe him. David was everything I'd ever wanted in a partner, kind, driven, supportive of my career. When he proposed, 18 months later, kneeling in the same coffee shop where we'd met, I didn't hesitate. "Yes," I whispered, tears streaming down my face as he slipped the ring onto my finger. Our wedding was beautiful, held in the garden of the Brooks family home. Patricia had insisted on planning everything, dismissing my suggestions with comments like, "We have our traditions, dear, and the Brooks family has certain expectations." Looking back at our wedding photos now, I can see the signs I missed. In every picture, Patricia stands slightly between David and me, her hand possessively on his arm. My own family looks uncomfortable, clearly out of place among the Brooks. Wealthy friends and associates, but in that moment, surrounded by flowers and fairy lights, dancing with David as the sun set behind us, I felt like the luckiest woman alive. I was marrying my best friend, becoming part of a family, starting a life I'd only dreamed of. "I love you, Mrs. Brooks," David whispered in my ear as we swayed to our first dance. "I love you too," I replied, believing wholeheartedly that love would be enough to overcome any obstacle. How naive I was. 2 months after our honeymoon, David and I found the perfect house. It was a 1920s craftsman bungalow in the Hawthorne district, with original hardwood floors, built-in bookshelves, and a kitchen that opened onto a garden, begging for vegetables and flowers. The moment I walked through the front door, I could envision our future there, dinner parties with friends, lazy Sunday mornings reading the paper, children running through the rooms. "This is it," I said, turning to David in the sunlit living room. "This is our home." He smiled, pulling me close. "I can see it too. Our life here." We made an offer that afternoon. The process was surprisingly smooth. David handled most of the paperwork, while I focused on my expanding client base. My design business was thriving, and I'd recently landed a contract with a major non-profit that would keep me busy for months. Both names on the deed, David insisted when we sat down with the real estate attorney, equal partners in everything. I squeezed his hand under the table, moved by his certainty. The house deed became our first official document as a married couple, proof that we were building something together. Those first months in the house were blissful. We painted the bedroom a soft sage green, installed new light fixtures, and spent weekends at antique shops looking for the perfect dining table. I set up my home office in the small room off the kitchen, where morning light streamed through windows overlooking our garden dot. My business was growing beyond anything I'd imagined. Word of mouth had brought me clients from across the city, and I was working with local restaurants, boutiques, and startups to create brand identities that told their stories. David would often find me still working at 9 p.m., lost in a design project. "You're incredible," he'd say, bringing me tea and massaging my shoulders. "I'm so proud of what you're building." Patricia, however, seemed less impressed. During family dinners, she'd make subtle comments about my little hobby and ask when I planned to settle down and focus on family. I'd catch her exchanging glances with Robert when I mentioned landing a new client or winning a design award. "It's so nice that you're keeping busy," she'd say with that practiced smile. David's always supported women having interests. The word interests stung, but David would squeeze my hand under the table and later assure me that his mother meant well. "She's from a different generation," he'd explain. "She doesn't understand modern careers." One evening, 6 months after moving into the house, I made an announcement that would change everything. "I'm pregnant," I said, placing my hand on my still flat stomach as we sat on our couch after dinner. David's face transformed with joy. He pulled me into his arms, spinning me around until I was dizzy with laughter. "Are you serious?" "We're having a baby?" "We're having a baby," I confirmed, tears of happiness streaming down my face. We called his parents immediately. Patricia's response was measured. "How wonderful, dear. Though I hope you'll be more careful with your health now. All that stress from your work can't be good for the baby." Even in my joy, I felt the criticism. That David was so excited, already, talking about converting the spare room into a nursery, that I pushed aside my concerns. The next few months were a whirlwind of doctor appointments, prenatal classes, and preparing for parenthood. My business continued to grow, and I was careful to maintain my energy and health. David was the perfect expectant father, reading parenting books, researching the safest car seats, and talking to my growing belly every night. "Hello, little one," he'd whisper, his hand on my stomach. "Daddy can't wait to meet you." But I began to notice changes in family dynamics. Patricia visited more frequently, always with suggestions about the nursery. the baby's name, or my prenatal care. She'd walk through our house with a proprietary air, rearranging things and commenting on our choices. You know, David was never fussy about his nursery, she'd say, moving a lamp I'd carefully positioned. Simple is often better. During one visit, she sat at our kitchen table going through papers. I hope you're keeping good records, she said, looking at our bills and documents. With a baby coming, you'll need to be more organized about finances. I found her going through our mail another time, including documents from my business. When I asked about it, she smiled sweetly. Just trying to help, dear. You seem so overwhelmed. David dismissed my concerns. She's excited about becoming a grandmother, he said. Let her help, but her help felt invasive. She'd answer our phone, telling my clients I was too tired to take calls. She'd rearrange my office, claiming she was tidying up. Most disturbing, she'd started asking detailed questions about our finances, our insurance, and our plans for the baby. Family should know these things, she'd say when I expressed discomfort. What if something happens? We need to be prepared. The questions felt odd, too specific. Why did she need to know about our life insurance policies? Why was she so interested in the house deed? When I mentioned it to David, he seemed genuinely confused. Mom's always been a planner, he said. She probably just wants to make sure we're set up for success. Looking back, I realized those questions weren't about planning, they were reconnaissance. Patricia was mapping our life, our assets, our vulnerabilities. She was learning everything she'd need to know to execute whatever plan was already forming in her mind, but surrounded by the excitement of impending parenthood. In the home we'd built together, I couldn't imagine the scope of her intentions. I was focused on the future, on the baby growing inside me, on the life David and I were creating. Had no idea that future was already being systematically dismantled. When I was 7 months pregnant, David came home from work with an intensity I'd never seen before. He walked straight to our home office, pulled out a manila folder, and spread legal documents across my desk. We need to update our will, he said without preamble. I looked up from my computer, where I was finishing a logo design for a local bakery. Our will? David, we're young and healthy. Can't this wait until after the baby comes? No, he said firmly. It can't wait. We need to do this now. His urgency puzzled me. We'd discussed estate planning casually before, but there had never been this sense of immediacy. David was methodical about everything. He researched purchases for weeks, planned vacations months in advance. This sudden rush felt out of character. What's brought this on? I asked, saving my work and turning to face him. He sat heavily in the chair across from my desk, running his hands through his hair. I've been thinking about responsibility, about what happens to you and the baby if something happens to me. We need legal protection. David, nothing's going to happen to you, I said, reaching for his hand. You're being paranoid. Am I? He pulled out a legal pad covered in his neat handwriting. I've been researching inheritance laws, property rights, family claims. Did you know that in Oregon, if I die without a will, my parents could potentially contest your right to this house? The suggestion seemed absurd. They'd never do that. This is our home. You don't know my family like I do, Camila. His voice was quiet but intense. There are things about them, about how they operate, that you don't understand. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October weather. What do you mean? David was quiet for a long moment, staring at the legal documents. My grandmother had money. Real money. When she died 5 years ago, she left everything to her children and grandchildren. But somehow, most of it ended up in my parents' accounts. Maybe she left it to them to distribute. Maybe, he said, but his tone suggested he didn't believe it. Marcus asked questions about it once. Mum shut him down fast, said it was family business, and that questioning it was disrespectful to grandmother's memory. I thought about my interactions with Patricia, her constant questions about our finances, her proprietary attitude toward our home. You think she'd try to take our house? I think she'd try to take everything if she could justify it. David picked up a pen, clicking it nervously. That's why we need ironclad legal protection. Everything goes to you if something happens to me. The house, my life insurance, my retirement accounts, everything. We spent the next 3 hours going through every detail. David was thorough to the point of obsession, making sure every asset was accounted for, every contingency covered. He insisted on specific language about the house, about my business, about our future children. I want a clause that specifically states my parents have no claim to any of our assets, he said to our lawyer when we met the following week. The lawyer, a kind woman named Helen Morrison, looked surprised. That's unusual language, David. You concerned about family disputes? I'm concerned about protecting my wife and child, he said simply. Helen nodded and made notes. Will include language that makes your intentions crystal clear. The will was comprehensive 8 pages of legal language that essentially said everything belonged to me and our children. David also insisted on a separate document naming me as his power of attorney and healthcare proxy, with explicit instructions that his parents were not to be consulted about medical decisions. You're really worried about this, I said as we left the lawyer's office. I'm being responsible, he corrected. There's a difference. But I noticed changes in his behavior around his family. At Sunday dinners, he'd grown quieter, more watchful. When Patricia made her usual comments about my work or asked her probing questions about our finances, David would deflect or change the subject. During one particularly tense dinner, Patricia was discussing holiday plans. Of course, the baby's first Christmas will be at our house, she said, as if it were already decided. It's family tradition. Actually, David said carefully, Camila and I want to start our own traditions. We'll probably stay home for the baby's first Christmas. The silence was deafening. Patricia's fork froze halfway to her mouth, and Robert looked up from his plate with surprise. Stay home? Patricia's voice was dangerously quiet. David, this family has celebrated Christmas together for 30 years. The baby will be a Brooks. The baby will be a Brooks Martinez, David corrected, using the hyphenated name we discussed. And we'll make decisions about holidays as a family. I watched Patricia's face transform, her composed mask slipping for just a moment to reveal something, cold and calculating. I see, she said finally. Of course you're the parents. Though I hope you'll consider the importance of family legacy. That word legacy seemed to hang in the air. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his chair, and Robert cleared his throat. Well, Robert said with forced cheer, there's plenty of time to figure out holidays. Let's just focus on the baby being healthy. But the damage was done. I could feel the tension radiating from Patricia for the rest of the evening. She made polite conversation, but her eyes remained cold, calculating. On the drive home, David was unusually quiet. That was intense, I said finally. It was necessary, he replied. They need to understand that we're our own family now. Your mom seemed upset about the Christmas thing. David's hands tightened on the steering wheel. My mom has always had trouble with boundaries. She thinks being family means having unlimited access to everyone's lives. Is that what you meant earlier about not knowing your family like you do? He was quiet for so long I thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he said, my mother is used to getting her way. She doesn't handle opposition well. But David, I'm having her grandchild. Surely she wouldn't. Camila, he interrupted. Promise me something. If anything ever happens to me, don't trust my family with legal matters. Don't sign anything without a lawyer present. Don't let them pressure you into any decisions. The request seemed so random, so dark, that I almost laughed. David, you're freaking me out. Nothing's going to happen to you. Promise me, he insisted, pulling into our driveway and turning to face me. Please. The intensity in his eyes scared me. I promise, I said quietly. He relaxed slightly, kissing my forehead. Good. I'm probably being paranoid, but I feel better, knowing you'll be careful. We went inside and got ready for bed, but I couldn't shake the feeling that David knew something he wasn't telling me. His will, his warnings, his sudden distance from his family, it all felt like preparation for something. Something that, less than 2 months later, would prove to be devastatingly prophetic. December 15th started like any other Monday. David left for work at 7:30 a.m., kissing my forehead and rubbing my enormous belly. I was 38 weeks pregnant, uncomfortable but healthy, working from home on a rebranding project for a local nonprofit. "I'll be home by 6, he promised, grabbing his coffee and briefcase. "We can work on the nursery some more." "Drive carefully," I called after him. The roads looked slick. It had been raining for 3 days straight, the kind of persistent Pacific Northwest drizzle that made everything treacherous. I spent the morning at my computer, occasionally getting up to stretch my aching back and check on the soup I had simmering for dinner. At 2:17 p.m., my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. "Mrs. Brooks?" The voice was professional, official. "This is Officer Martinez with the Portland Police Bureau. I'm calling about your husband, David Brooks." The words that followed came from very far away. Accident, rainy conditions, loss of control, hospital, critical condition. I remember dropping the phone, the sound of it clattering against the hardwood floor. I remember sinking to my knees, one hand on my belly, the other pressed to my mouth to keep from screaming. The drive to the hospital was a blur of rain and panic. I called David's parents from the car, my hands shaking as I dialed. "Patricia, it's Camila. There's been an accident." "David," my voice broke. "We'll be right there," she said, her voice immediately taking charge. "Which hospital?" "Oh, Sue, he's in surgery." "Don't do anything until we get there," she said, and hung up. The waiting room at Oregon Health and Science University was sterile and cold. I sat in an uncomfortable chair, my hands protecting my belly, praying to any god who might be listening. A doctor came out eventually, a young woman with kind eyes and devastating news. "I'm sorry," she said, sitting beside me. "We did everything we could. The impact was too severe." The rest of her words were lost in the roar of my own heartbeat. David was gone. The love of my life, the father of my unborn child, was gone. Patricia and Robert arrived 20 minutes later, Patricia immediately taking control of the situation. She spoke to the doctors, made phone calls, handled paperwork. In my shock, I was grateful for her efficiency. "What happened?" Marcus asked, his eyes red with tears. "Hydroplaned on the highway," Patricia said briskly. "Lost control and hit a tree. The rain, you know." I sat in stunned silence, one hand on my belly where the baby was kicking anxiously, as if sensing the chaos around us. David's family moved around me like I was a piece of furniture, making decisions and arrangements. "We'll handle the funeral," Patricia said, not asking but stating. "David would want it done properly." I nodded, incapable of arguing. The baby kicked again, harder this time, and I felt a sharp pain in my lower back. "I think I need to go home," I said weakly. "Of course," Patricia said. "Robert will drive you. You shouldn't be alone right now." "Actually, I'd like to." "Nonsense," she interrupted. "Family needs to stick together during times like this. We'll make sure you're taken care of." The police report came later that week, a clinical document that reduced David's death to measurements and statistics. Vehicle speed, impact trajectory, weather conditions. The officer who filed it was apologetic but thorough. "I'm sorry for your loss, Mrs. Brooks," he said, handing me the folder. "Your husband was a good man. This was just a tragic accident." I held the report like it was sacred text, the last official record of David's life. But even in my grief, something felt wrong. David was an excellent driver, cautious to a fault. He'd driven that route to work hundreds of times, even in worse weather. Was there anything unusual about the accident? I asked Officer Martinez. He looked at me with sympathy. "Ma'am, accidents happen. Sometimes there's no explanation beyond bad luck and bad weather." But David's voice echoed in my mind. If anything ever happens to me, don't trust my family with legal matters. Had he somehow known? Or was I looking for conspiracy where there was only tragedy? The funeral was held 3 days later at Patricia's church. She'd arranged everything, the flowers, the service, the reception. I sat in the front pew, 8 months pregnant and drowning in grief, while she managed every detail with military precision. He was a wonderful son, she said during her eulogy. Devoted to his family, committed to carrying on the Brooks legacy. His greatest joy was being part of this family. I wanted to scream. David's greatest joy was our life together, our plans for the future, our unborn child. But I sat silent, too broken to fight. After the service, people approached me with condolences. Many were David's family friends, people I'd met only briefly. They offered support, but their words felt hollow. Such a tragedy, one woman said, squeezing my hand. But at least the baby will have family to help raise them. The phrasing struck me as odd. The baby would have me. I was the mother. Patricia appeared at my elbow. Camila looks exhausted, she announced to the group. I think we should get her home. I can drive myself, I said. Absolutely not, Patricia said firmly. Marcus will take you home. Robert and I will follow to make sure you're settled. I was too tired to argue. The 3 of them accompanied me to the house David and I had shared, the home we'd planned to bring our baby to. Patricia immediately began organizing things, going through mail, tidying up. You shouldn't be dealing with all these details, she said, gathering bills and documents. Let family handle the business matters. I can manage, I said weakly. Of course you can, dear, but you don't have to. That's what family is for. She spent an hour going through David's desk, his papers, his computer. Just getting things organized, she explained when I questioned her. There will be insurance forms, legal matters. Better to have everything in order. When they finally left, I sat alone in the house that suddenly felt too big, too empty. I held the police report in my hands, reading David's final moments reduced to official language. The baby kicked insistently, and I felt another sharp pain in my back. It's okay, little one, I whispered to my belly. We're going to be okay. But even as I said the words, I had a terrible feeling that my nightmare was just beginning. Patricia's behavior, her immediate takeover of the situation, her intense interest in our documents, it all felt calculated, purposeful. David's warning echoed in my mind, don't trust my family with legal matters. I hadn't understood then what he was trying to protect me from. I was about to learn. The days following David's funeral blurred together in a haze of grief and exhaustion. Patricia had appointed herself my caretaker, arriving at my house each morning with casseroles, sympathy cards, and an endless list of tasks that needed immediate attention. You can't handle all this alone, she'd say, settling into David's chair, with a stack of papers. Let me help you sort through everything. I was grateful for her presence, even as something about her efficiency unsettled me. She moved through my home with purpose, organizing David's belongings, fielding phone calls, and managing the steady stream of visitors who came to pay their respects. One morning, she arrived with a sympathy card that seemed different from the others. The front showed a peaceful garden scene, but when I opened it, the message inside felt oddly specific. During this difficult time, remember that family legacy lives on through the next generation. David's child will carry the Brooks name and traditions forward. We're here to help ensure that happens properly. With love and support, the Brooks family. The phrasing bothered me. David's child would carry my love, my values, my memories of their father. The Brooks name was just one small part of their identity. This is a beautiful card, I said carefully, showing it to Patricia. She glanced at it briefly. Oh yes, that's from David's great-aunt Margaret. She's very traditional about family matters. She believes strongly in maintaining proper connections. Proper connections? Well, ensuring the baby knows their heritage, their place in the family structure. These things matter more than you might realize. I felt a familiar chill but pushed it aside. Patricia was grieving too, I reminded myself. She'd lost her son. Her focus on family legacy was probably her way of processing that loss, but her behavior became increasingly intrusive. She'd arrive early and stay late, going through David's computer to handle his business affairs, reorganizing my kitchen to make things easier, and fielding calls from my clients. So you don't have to worry about work right now. Mrs. Brooks is too exhausted to take on new projects. I heard her tell one potential client. She need to focus on the baby for the foreseeable future. When I confronted her about it, she looked hurt. I was trying to protect you from stress. You need to think about the baby's health. I can manage my own business, Patricia. Of course, you can, dear, but is it really wise? David always worried about you working too hard. It was a lie. David had always supported my career, had been proud of my success. But in my grief-stricken state, I began to doubt my own memories. The manipulation was subtle but constant. Patricia would mention David's preferences, his concerns, his wishes, always framed as protection for me and the baby, always positioning herself as the keeper of his true intentions. David mentioned he was worried about the stairs in this house, she said one afternoon, standing at the bottom of our staircase. He thought they might be dangerous for a pregnant woman. He never said anything like that to me. Well, he wouldn't want to worry you, but he discussed it with me several times. Perhaps something more suitable would be better for the baby. She began suggesting changes, practical modifications that somehow required her involvement. The guest room should be converted to a nursery on the ground floor. The home office should be moved upstairs, since you won't be working as much anyway. These weren't requests. They were presented as David's wishes, as necessary preparations. Meanwhile, Marcus had started visiting more frequently, always with his mother. He seemed uncomfortable with her behavior, but never challenged her directly. During one visit, I caught him looking through David's desk while Patricia distracted me in the kitchen. "What are you looking for?" I asked. He jumped, clearly startled. "Oh, just some family photos Mom wanted." David had some old pictures of our grandfather, but he wasn't looking at photos. He was rifling through David's files, the same ones Patricia had been organizing for days. Friends began calling less frequently. When I mentioned this to Patricia, she explained that she told people I needed space to grieve. "Everyone understands you're not ready for visitors," she said. "I've been protecting your privacy." My isolation deepened. Without work distractions or social connections, I became increasingly dependent on Patricia's presence and guidance. She filled my days with her version of David's story, her interpretation of his wishes, her plans for the baby's future. David always said he wanted his children raised with strong family values, she'd say while folding tiny baby clothes. He believed in tradition, in maintaining connections to the past. "What kind of traditions?" I asked. "Oh, you know, Sunday dinners, holiday celebrations, family vacations. Ensuring the child understands where they come from." It sounded reasonable, even sweet, but the way she said it felt possessive, as if she were already planning my child's life without me. One evening, she stayed later than usual, sitting at my kitchen table with a stack of papers. "I've been thinking about practical matters," she said without preamble. "With David gone, you'll need help managing everything. The house, the baby, the financial responsibilities. I can handle." "Of course you can," she interrupted smoothly. "But why should you have to? Family should support each other. Robert and I have been discussing ways we can help." She spread out documents, insurance forms, bank statements, legal papers I didn't recognize. "What are these?" "Just preliminary information. David's life insurance, his retirement accounts, the mortgage details. We want to make sure everything is properly managed for you and the baby." I felt uncomfortable with her access to these documents, but she explained it so reasonably. David listed Robert as a secondary contact on several accounts. "It's just a formality, but it means we can help handle the paperwork." The papers required my signature in several places. Patricia guided me through each one, explaining that they were simply notifications of David's death, updates to account information, standard procedures. I signed them, trusting her guidance, grateful for her help with details that felt overwhelming. In my grief, it wasn't until weeks later that I would discover what I had actually signed and realize that Patricia's sympathy card had been more than a condolence message. It had been a declaration of war. 2 weeks after David's funeral, on a cold Tuesday night in December, I woke to a sharp pain that took my breath away. At first, I thought it was another bout of heartburn. The baby had been pressing against my ribs for weeks. But when the pain came again 5 minutes later, I realized what was happening. Labor, 2 weeks early. And I was completely alone. I reached for my phone to call Patricia, but something made me hesitate. David's voice echoed in my memory. Don't trust my family with legal matters. The thought seemed irrational. This was medical, not legal, but his warning had taken root in my mind. Instead, I called my doctor's emergency line. Dr. Sarah Chen had been wonderful throughout my pregnancy, patient with my questions and supportive of my decisions. Camila, how are you feeling? Her voice was warm even at 2 a.m. I think I'm in labor, I said, gripping the edge of my nightstand as another contraction hit. The contractions are 5 minutes apart. Okay, let's get you to the hospital. Do you have someone to drive you? I thought about calling Patricia, but something held me back. I can drive myself. Absolutely not. Call a friend or family member, or I can arrange an ambulance. I'll call someone, I promised, though I wasn't sure who. After hanging up, I sat on the edge of my bed, feeling desperately alone. Most of my friends had been kept at arm's length by Patricia's well-meaning interference. My own family lived across the country. David's family, well, they would come. But Patricia's increasing control over my life made me reluctant to put myself in a vulnerable position. Another contraction hit, stronger this time, and I made a decision. I called an Uber. The driver, a kind middle-aged woman named Rosa, took one look at my condition and immediately offered to help. Mia, you should not be alone for this, she said in accented English. Where is your family? It's complicated, I said. Breathing through another contraction, she stayed with me until the hospital staff took over, squeezing my hand and promising to pray for me and the baby. Her kindness brought tears to my eyes, more genuine care from a stranger than I'd felt from my in-laws in weeks at the hospital. I was admitted to the maternity ward and settled into a private room. The contractions were getting stronger, and Dr. Chen arrived within an hour. How are we doing? She asked, checking my progress. Scared, I admitted. I never imagined doing this alone. You're not alone, she said gently. We're all here to support you. Have you called anyone? David's family? I hesitated. They've been very involved since David died. Sometimes too involved. I think I need some space to process this on my own. Dr. Chan nodded understandingly. Whatever you need. This is your experience, your choice. Labor progressed slowly through the morning. I called Patricia around 8 a.m. when the contractions became too intense to hide. You're in labor? Her voice was sharp with what sounded like irritation rather than concern. Why didn't you call us immediately? I wanted to make sure it was real labor before worrying everyone. We'll be right there. Actually, Patricia, I'd like some time to... Nonsense. You can't do this alone. We're family. She hung up before I could protest further. 20 minutes later, she arrived with Robert and Marcus in tow, immediately taking charge of the situation. What has the doctor said? She demanded, barely acknowledging my obvious discomfort. How far along are you? About 6 centimeters, I said between contractions. Good. We have time to get organized. She began unpacking things from a large bag, snacks, magazines, a change of clothes. I brought everything we might need. Patricia, I really think I'd prefer... Another contraction cut off my words, and she was immediately at my side, not with comfort but with instructions. Breathe properly, Camila. You need to focus on the baby's well-being. Dr. Chen entered during one of Patricia's breathing lectures and immediately assessed the tension in the room. "How are we doing, Camila?" she asked pointedly, making it clear I was her patient, not Patricia. "The contractions are getting stronger," I said. "Good, that's normal progress." She turned to the group. "I'll need to examine Camila privately. Family can wait in the lounge." "I'm staying," Patricia said firmly. "I have experience with childbirth." "I'd like some privacy," I said quietly. Patricia's face showed surprise, then irritation. "Camila, this isn't the time to be difficult. You need support." "She needs whatever makes her comfortable," Dr. Chen said with quiet authority. "Please wait outside." After they left, Dr. Chen checked my progress again. 8 centimeters. "You're doing beautifully. But I need to ask, are you comfortable with your support system? You seem tense when they're here." I started to cry, hormones and exhaustion overwhelming me. I don't know what I want anymore. Since David died, his mother has been so helpful, but also so controlling. I feel like I'm losing myself. "This is your birth experience," Dr. Chen said firmly. "You get to decide who's in this room, how you want to handle pain management, everything. Don't let anyone pressure you into decisions that don't feel right." When the time came to push, I made a choice that surprised everyone, including myself. I asked for the room to be cleared except for Dr. Chen and the nurses. "I want to do this alone," I said. "I want to meet my baby without an audience." Patricia was outraged. "Camila, this is ridiculous. Family should be present for such an important moment." "Please," I said through tears. "I need this." Dr. Chen escorted them out, promising to update them as soon as the baby was born. For the next 2 hours, it was just me, Dr. Chen, and 2 wonderful nurses who coached me through each push with gentle encouragement. When my daughter finally emerged, pink and perfect and screaming with indignation, I held her alone first. Just the 2 of us in those precious initial moments. "Hello, Emma," I whispered, using the name David and I had chosen together. "I'm your mama." The birth certificate would later list only my name in the parent section, detail that would become crucial in ways I couldn't yet imagine. Emma Rose Brooks, born December 30th, to Camila Martinez Brooks. No father listed because he was gone. No other family mentioned because in that moment, it was just us when Patricia and the others were finally allowed in. Emma was clean and dressed, nestled against my chest. Patricia immediately reached for her. "Let me hold my granddaughter," she said, not asking but expecting. "In a moment," I said, not ready to let go. "We're still getting acquainted." The look Patricia gave me was cold, calculating. Later, I would recognize it as the moment she realized I might not be as malleable as she'd assumed. But in that moment, holding my daughter, I felt stronger than I had since David's death. Emma was mine, completely and absolutely mine. Whatever challenges lay ahead, we would face them together. 3 days after Emma's birth, Dr. Chen discharged us from the hospital with strict instructions for rest and recovery. I was exhausted but eager to take my daughter home. To begin our life together in the house David and I had prepared for her. Patricia had visited every day, each time with more bags of baby supplies and unsolicited advice. She tried repeatedly to take Emma from my arms, offering to give me a break or help with feeding. Each time I politely declined, wanting to establish my own rhythm with my newborn. "You're being stubborn," she'd said on the final morning. "New mothers need help. You can't do everything yourself." "I'm managing fine," I replied, though Emma had been fussy all night and I felt like I was fumbling through every task. "David would want his family involved in raising his daughter," Patricia said with that familiar edge to her voice. "David would want Emma to know she's loved," I countered. "That's what matters most." The ride home should have been joyful, my first car trip with Emma, bringing her to the house where David and I had dreamed of raising our children. Instead, I felt anxious, though I couldn't pinpoint why. Everything looked normal as we pulled into the driveway. The garden David had planned to expand was dormant for winter, the porch light glowing warmly in the grey afternoon. I gathered Emma's car seat and diaper bag, my movements still slow from delivery dot at the front door. I shifted Emma to one arm and reached for my keys. The familiar weight of them felt comforting. Home, safety, the beginning of our new life together. But my key wouldn't turn in the lock. I tried again, thinking I was just tired and clumsy. The keys slid into the opening but wouldn't engage the mechanism. Confused, I examined the lock more closely. It looked different, somehow newer, shinier than I remembered. That's impossible, I muttered, trying my key one more time. Nothing. Emma began to fuss in her carrier, sensing my distress. I tried the back door, the same result. My heart began to race as the reality sank in. Someone had changed the locks. I was standing in my own driveway, holding my newborn daughter, unable to get into my own house. Before I could process what to do next, the front door opened from inside. A woman I'd never seen before appeared, middle-aged, wearing a housecoat, looking annoyed by the disturbance. "Can I help you?" she asked with the tone of someone addressing a solicitor. "I'm sorry, there's been some mistake," I said, my voice shaking. "This is my house. I live here." The woman looked skeptical. "No, dear, Mr. and Mrs. Brooks live here. I'm the housekeeper they hired while they're away." "Mr. and Mrs. Brooks?" "No, I'm Mrs. Brooks. Camila Brooks. This is my house." "I think you're confused," the woman said. Not unkindly but firmly. "The Brooks family owns this property. If you're looking for someone else, perhaps you have the wrong address." Emma's fussing escalated to crying, and I felt my own tears starting. "Please, I can prove this is my house. I have mail, documents. Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. If you continue to claim you live here, I'll need to call the police." "Call them," I said desperately. "Please call them. There's been some terrible mistake." The woman studied me with what might have been sympathy, then stepped back inside. "I'll make the call." I stood on the porch holding my crying daughter, staring at the home I'd lived in for over a year. Through the windows I could see our furniture, our belongings, but somehow it all looked different, rearranged, reorganized. A police car arrived 15 minutes later. The officer who emerged was young, professional, and clearly tired of domestic disputes. "Ma'am, I'm Officer Johnson. I understand there's some confusion about this property." "There's no confusion," I said, bouncing Emma gently to calm her. "This is my house. I live here with my husband, my late husband, and we just brought our daughter home from the hospital." He looked at Emma, then at me, his expression softening slightly. "When did your husband pass away?" 3 weeks ago. Car accident. But this is still my house. My name is on the deed." Officer Johnson nodded. "Let me speak with the person inside, and we'll sort this out." He went inside with the housekeeper for several minutes. When he returned, his demeanor had changed. "Ma'am, I've seen the property documents. The house is owned by Robert and Patricia Brooks. They've hired Mrs. Henderson here as a caretaker, while they're handling some family business. That's impossible. My husband and I bought this house together. Both our names are on the deed. Do you have documentation with you?" I realized my purse was inside the house, inside a house I apparently no longer had access to. My documents are inside. My purse, my identification, everything. I understand this is distressing, especially with a new baby. But without documentation, I can't verify your claims. Is there somewhere you can stay tonight? Family, perhaps? The irony was crushing. The only family I had locally was the Brooks family, who had apparently stolen my home. "Officer, please. There has to be some record. We bought this house 18 months ago. There are mortgage payments, utility bills in both our names. Ma'am, property disputes are civil matters. You'll need to contact a lawyer and work through the courts. I can't remove legal occupants based on claims alone." Emma's crying had intensified, and other neighbors were beginning to watch from their windows. I felt exposed, humiliated, desperate. Where am I supposed to go with my newborn baby? Officer Johnson looked genuinely sympathetic. "Is there anyone you can call?" Family? Friends? I thought about Patricia, about her recent behavior, her insistence on handling David's affairs. A terrible suspicion began forming in my mind. Can you tell me who filed the property claim? I asked. I can't share specific details, but the owners have been in contact with local authorities about potential issues with the property. They mentioned there might be confusion due to a recent family death. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Patricia hadn't been helping me. She'd been positioning herself to take everything. The papers I'd signed, her questions about finances, her organization of David's documents. Emma's cries were becoming exhausted whimpers, and my own energy was fading fast. I needed shelter, food, a place to care for my baby. There's a family shelter downtown, Officer Johnson offered gently. They take mothers with infants. It's not ideal, but a shelter? The word hit me like a physical blow. 3 days ago, I'd been in a private hospital room. Now I was homeless with a newborn. I'm sorry, he said, and he genuinely seemed to be. Without documentation, there's nothing more I can do. Tonight. As he drove away, I stood in the driveway of the home David and I had chosen together, holding our daughter, with nowhere to go. The woman Mrs. Henderson watched from the window with what looked like pity. The locks had been changed, but more than that, my entire life had been changed. In the span of 3 weeks, I'd lost my husband, and now I'd lost my home, my security, my sense of reality itself. Emma looked up at me with David's dark eyes, trusting completely in my ability to protect her. I kissed her forehead and made a silent promise. Whatever Patricia had done, however she'd managed this, I would get our life back. But first, I needed to find us somewhere safe to sleep. I spent that first night at a motel near the hospital, using the emergency credit card I kept in Emma's diaper bag. The room was clean but depressing. 2 double beds, fluorescent lighting, and the constant hum of traffic outside. Emma slept fitfully, picking up on my stress, while I sat awake trying to make sense of what had happened. The next morning, I called the bank. My checking account was frozen. My business account was frozen. According to the representative, there were estate complications that required legal resolution before any funds could be accessed. But these are my accounts, I said, pacing the small motel room while Emma napped. I'm not dead. My husband is dead. I understand your frustration, ma'am, but we have documentation indicating the accounts are part of a contested estate. You'll need to work with the estate attorney to resolve the matter. Who filed the contest? I can't share that information over the phone. You'll need to speak with our legal department. The walls felt like they were closing in. No home, no money, no access to my own life. Emma stirred in her portable crib, and I picked her up, needing the comfort of her warm weight against my chest. A knock at the door made me freeze. Through the peephole, I saw Patricia standing in the hallway, perfectly composed in her wool coat and leather gloves. Camila, dear, open the door. We need to talk. I considered pretending I wasn't there, but Emma chose that moment to make a small sound. I heard Patricia sigh outside. I know you're in there. This is ridiculous. Open the door. With Emma in my arms, I unlocked the door but kept the chain engaged, creating a gap just wide enough to see Patricia's face. What do you want? To help you, she said with that practiced smile. This situation has gotten out of hand. There's been a misunderstanding about the house. A misunderstanding? Patricia, I couldn't get into my own home. The locks were changed. There were security concerns after David's death. The house needed to be protected while the estate was being settled. Protected from what? From me? Patricia's smile became strained. May I come in? We shouldn't discuss family business in a motel. Hallway. Against my better judgment, I unlatched the chain. Patricia entered, immediately assessing the room with obvious distaste. Oh, Camila, this is no place for a baby. Emma needs proper care, a proper environment. Emma was fine in her proper environment until someone changed the locks. Patricia sat on one of the beds, smoothing her coat. I have some papers here that will clarify everything. She opened her expensive handbag and withdrew a manila folder. David's estate is more complicated than we initially realized. She spread documents. Across the polyester bedspread legal papers with official seals, bank statements, property records. The letterhead belonged to Morrison, Clark and Associates, a law firm I'd never heard of. "This is David's will?" I asked, recognizing the document. "A more recent version, yes." It seems David updated his estate planning shortly before his death. I scanned the pages, my confusion growing. This will was different from the one David and I had signed with Helen Morrison. The language was similar, but crucial details had changed. "This says the house goes to the Brooks family estate, not to me." Yes, that was David's final wish. He wanted to ensure the property remained in the family name. That's impossible. We met with our lawyer together. David specifically wanted everything to go to me. Patricia's expression was sympathetic but firm. "I understand this is confusing, dear, but sometimes men change their minds about these matters without telling their wives. Perhaps David was concerned about your ability to manage such a large property alone." I studied the signature on the will. It looked like David's handwriting, that something felt wrong. The date was just 1 week before his death, during a period when he'd been working late every night on a major project. "I want to see our original will. The one we signed with Helen Morrison." I'm afraid that document was superseded by this one. Mr. Clark, our family attorney, has verified its authenticity. I never met any Mr. Clark. David and I used Helen Morrison exclusively. Patricia waved dismissively. David consulted with Mr. Clark independently. Men sometimes handle these matters privately, especially when it involves family inheritance. She pulled out more documents, bank statements showing accounts I didn't recognize, property records with only David's name, insurance policies listing the Brooks family as beneficiaries. "I don't understand any of this," I said, feeling overwhelmed. "These accounts, these policies, we never discussed any of them. David was protecting you from financial stress during your pregnancy. He managed these matters himself. But my business accounts are frozen too. How does that relate to David's estate?" Patricia's pause was almost imperceptible. There were some irregularities in how the accounts were structured. For tax purposes, David had to be listed as a co-owner on your business accounts. It was a lie. I knew it was a lie because I'd set up those accounts myself, without David's involvement. That Patricia delivered it with such confidence, surrounded by so many official-looking documents, that I began to doubt my own memory. "This is insane," I said, bouncing Emma gently as she began to fuss. 3 weeks ago I had a home, a business, a life. Now you're telling me none of it was ever really mine." "I know it's overwhelming," Patricia said, her voice taking on a counseling tone. "But David wanted to provide for you and Emma. The estate will ensure you're both taken care of properly." "How?" She smiled, and there was something predatory in it. "The family has discussed it extensively. We want you and Emma to come stay with us while the estate is settled. You'll have everything you need, a beautiful room for Emma, help with childcare, proper support during this difficult time. And my business? Well, you'll be too busy being a mother to work for a while anyway. The estate will provide a monthly allowance for your expenses, an allowance. Like I was a child, dependent on their generosity rather than a grown woman with her own career and assets." "What if I don't want that arrangement?" Patricia's mask slipped slightly. "I'm not sure you have much choice, dear. You have no income, no home, and a newborn baby to care for. The courts tend to favor arrangements that provide stability for children." The threat was delicately delivered, but unmistakable. "Accept their terms or risk losing Emma." "I want to speak with a lawyer, my own lawyer." "Of course," Patricia said, gathering her papers. "But legal consultations are expensive, and as I mentioned, your accounts are currently frozen. Mr. Clark would be happy to represent your interests as well, at no charge, as a family service." I stared at her, finally seeing the trap that had been so carefully constructed. Every kindness, every offer of help, Every document I'd signed in my grief, it had all been leading to this moment. You planned this, I said quietly. All of it. From the moment David died, you've been planning. To take everything. Patricia stood, smoothing her coat again. Camila, I understand you're emotional. New mothers often experience anxiety and paranoia. It's quite common. She moved toward the door, then turned back. I'm staying at the Marriott downtown tonight. When you're ready to be reasonable, call me. Emma needs stability, and we're prepared to provide it. After she left, I sat on the bed holding Emma, staring at the forged documents she'd left behind. The signature on the will was good, very good, but I knew David's handwriting better than anyone. There were subtle differences, tiny variations that suggested careful practice rather than natural flow. My phone rang. Dr. Chin's name appeared on the screen. Camila, I wanted to check on you and Emma. How are you managing at home? I started, crying before I could answer, the stress and exhaustion finally overwhelming me. Through my tears, I told her everything: the changed locks, the frozen accounts, Patricia's visit with the forged documents. I need help, I whispered. I don't know what to do. Dr. Chun was quiet for a moment. Camila, I want you to listen to me carefully. What you're describing sounds like elder abuse tactics applied to a new mother. It's a form of financial and emotional manipulation. But the documents look so official. Documents can be forged. Signatures can be copied. But I remember David from your prenatal appointments. He was devoted to you and excited about building your life together. Nothing about these claims matches the man I observed. Her words gave me the first hope I'd felt since David's death. Someone believed me. Someone saw through Patricia's manipulation. What should I do? First, find a lawyer who specializes in estate law and fraud. Second, get copies of all your original documents if you can. Third, document everything, every conversation, every threat, every demand. I can't afford a lawyer. My accounts are frozen. There are legal aid services for situations like this. I'll send you some numbers. And Camila, trust your instincts. You knew David better than anyone. Trust what you know to be true. After hanging up, I looked down at Emma, who was watching me with David's serious dark eyes. Your daddy tried to protect us, I whispered to her, and now it's my turn to fight back. The next morning, I called the legal aid number Dr. Chun had sent me. The receptionist was kind but realistic about my prospects. We have a 3-week waiting list for estate cases, she explained. But if you're facing immediate housing issues with an infant, we might be able to arrange an emergency consultation. It's immediate, I said, looking around the motel room. That was costing me money I didn't have. I'm homeless with a newborn because someone has stolen my house. She scheduled an appointment for that afternoon. In the meantime, I decided to do my own investigation. If Patricia was lying about the will, she might be lying about other things too. I started with a simple internet search for Morrison, Clark and Associates, the law firm on Patricia's documents. No results. No website, no business listings, no professional registrations. A firm handling estates worth hundreds of thousands of dollars should have some online presence. Next, I called our original lawyer, Helen Morrison. Camila, I'm so sorry for your loss, Helen said when her assistant put me through. How are you and the baby doing? Not well, I admitted. Helen, did David ever contact you about changing his will after we signed it in October? No, absolutely not. The will we prepared remains in effect unless he formally revoked it, which he didn't. Someone showed me a different will yesterday, dated just a week before David died. There was a long pause. Camila, that's not possible. David never contacted me about any changes. And any modifications would have required your knowledge since you're the primary beneficiary. I felt the first real surge of hope I'd experienced since finding the locks change. Would you be willing to testify to that if needed? Of course. Camila, if someone is claiming to have a different will, you need to report this immediately. Will fraud is a serious crime. After hanging up, I sat in the motel's lobby with Emma in her carrier, using their Wi-Fi to research Patricia's claims. Every document she'd shown me began to unravel under scrutiny. The property records she'd displayed were forgeries. I found the real county records online, showing David and me as joint owners with full survivorship rights. The insurance policies she'd claimed listed the Brooks family as beneficiaries were also suspicious. The policy numbers didn't match any records I could find, but I needed more than internet research. I needed evidence, and I needed allies. Remembered Jake Sullivan, David's best friend from college. They'd stayed close over the years, and Jake had spoken beautifully at David's funeral. If anyone would know about David's true intentions, it would be Jake. I found his number in my phone and called, praying he'd answer. "Camila, how are you holding up? How's the baby?" Jake's voice was warm, concerned, and hearing it made me realize how isolated I'd become since David's death. "Jake, I need help. Something terrible is happening, and I don't know who else to trust." I told him everything: the changed locks, the frozen accounts, Patricia's forged documents. Jake listened without interruption, but I could hear his anger building. "That's impossible," he said finally. "David talked to me about his will just last month. He was adamant that everything should go to you and the baby if anything happened to him." "You're sure?" "Completely sure. He was worried about his family's reaction, actually. He said his mother had always been controlling about money and property." My heart raced. "Did he tell you anything specific about being worried?" "He mentioned that his mother had been asking an ass of questions about your finances, your business, the house deed. It made him uncomfortable. He said he was glad he'd been thorough with the legal paperwork." "Jake, I think Patricia has been planning this since David died, maybe even before." "I believe you," he said without hesitation. "And I might be able to help. David gave me something before he died, said it was insurance in case his family ever tried to interfere with his wishes." I gripped the phone tighter. "What kind of something?" "A copy of his real will and some other documents. He was paranoid about keeping backups away from his family." "Can you meet me somewhere?" We arranged to meet at a coffee shop downtown, the same chain where David and I had first met. Jake was already there when I arrived, Emma's carrier heavy in my arms. He looked older than I remembered, grief having aged him in the weeks since the funeral. "Camila," he said, standing to embrace me carefully around Emma's carrier. "You look exhausted. I haven't slept much since David died. And the last few days have been a nightmare." Jake had brought a briefcase, which he opened carefully on our table. Inside were photocopies of documents, our real will, property deeds, insurance policies, and something I'd never seen before. "What's this?" I asked, looking at a letter in David's handwriting. He wrote it about a month before he died. Said if anything ever happened to him, I should give it to you if his family started causing problems. My hands shook as I unfolded the letter. David's familiar handwriting filled 2 pages. "My dearest Camila," it began. "If you're reading this, then something has happened to me, and I'm hoping my worries about my family were unfounded. But if they weren't, if my mother is trying to claim our home, our assets, or interfere with your care of our child, then you need to know the truth about the Brooks family." The letter detailed Patricia's history of financial manipulation. David's grandmother had indeed left money to her grandchildren, but Patricia had convinced the elderly woman to change her will shortly before her death, claiming the grandchildren were too young to handle inheritance responsibly. She convinced Grandma Rose that she would hold the money in trust and distribute it when we were older, David had written. That was 15 years ago. None of us has ever seen a penny of that inheritance. The letter went on to describe other incidents' family properties that had mysteriously ended up in Patricia's name. Investments that had failed, but somehow benefited Patricia's accounts. Relatives who had been isolated from the family after questioning her financial management. "I've been documenting her behavior for years," the letter continued. "I have bank records, forged signatures, evidence of her manipulating elderly relatives. I've been planning to expose her, but I wanted to protect you and our child first." If something happens to me before I can act, use this information. Don't let her destroy our life together. Attached to the letter were photocopies of bank statements, property transfers, and other documents that painted a clear picture of systematic fraud spanning decades. David suspected his mother might try something like this? I asked Jake. He was afraid of it. He said his mother had never been able to, except that he'd chosen his own life over her control. The pregnancy made him especially nervous. He thought she might see the baby as a way to maintain influence over him, even after death. I thought about Patricia's behavior at the hospital, her insistence on being involved in every decision, her immediate takeover of David's affairs after his death. He was right to be worried, I said quietly. Jake leaned forward. Camila, David made me promise to help you if anything like this happened. I have copies of everything, and I know a lawyer who specializes in fraud cases. She's not cheap, but she's ruthless when it comes to family manipulation. I can't afford a lawyer. My accounts are frozen. David thought of that too. Jake pulled out one more document, a bank statement for an account I'd never seen before. He opened a separate account in your name only, funded with money from his freelance architectural work. Patricia doesn't know about it because it's not connected to any of your other accounts. The balance showed $47,000, enough to fight back, enough to reclaim our life. He really thought of everything, I whispered, tears blurring my vision. He loved you, Jake said simply. And he loved that baby. He wasn't going to let his family destroy what you built together. Emma stirred in her carrier, opening her dark eyes and looking around the coffee shop with curious alertness. I picked her up, holding her close. What's the lawyer's name? Sarah Chen, no relation to your doctor. She's downtown and she can. See you tomorrow morning if you're ready to fight. I looked down at Emma, then at the evidence of David's love and protection spread across the table. My husband had tried to shield us from his family's greed, had prepared for this exact scenario. I'm ready, I said. Patricia Brooks has no idea what she started. That evening, I moved from the motel to a small apartment Jake helped me find her. Short-term rental that would give Emma and me a safe place to stay while we fought for our real home. Using David's secret account, I could afford basic necessities and legal representation. Before going to sleep, I started a voice memo on my phone, documenting every conversation with Patricia, every threat, every manipulation. If she wanted a war over David's legacy, she was about to discover that she'd underestimated the strength of a mother protecting her child. David had given me the weapons I needed. Now it was time to use them. Sarah Chen's law office occupied the 15th floor of a downtown Portland high-rise, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Willamette River. Despite sharing a name with my doctor, this Sarah Chen was completely different, sharp-suited, intense, with the kind of focused energy that suggested she'd built her career on cases others considered impossible. Jake told me about your situation, she said, gesturing for me to sit across from her imposing desk. Emma was sleeping in her carrier, finally peaceful after a restless night in our temporary apartment. I've seen family fraud before, but this sounds particularly systematic. I spread David's letter and supporting documents across her desk, watching her expression grow darker as she read through each page. Your husband was thorough, she said finally. This level of documentation suggests he'd been planning legal action against his family before his death. He never mentioned that to me. He was probably trying to protect you from the stress during your pregnancy. But look at this. She pointed to one of the bank statements David had copied. He was tracking transfers from his grandmother's estate accounts to his parents' personal accounts. This is evidence of elder financial abuse. Sarah pulled out a legal pad and began making notes. Tell me about the will Patricia showed you. I described my visit with Patricia at the motel, her presentation of the forged documents, her offer to let me live with them in exchange for compliance. Classic control tactics, Sarah said. Isolate the victim, control their resources, then offer the only apparent solution. Did you notice anything specific about the signature on the false will? It looked like David's handwriting, but something felt wrong. The pressure was different. Maybe the angle. We'll need a handwriting expert to analyze it. Do you have examples of David's genuine signature? I pulled out our real will, still folded in my purse from the day I'd fled the hospital. Sarah compared the signatures side by side. Even to my untrained eye, these look different. The forged one is too careful, too perfect. Real signatures have natural variations. She leaned back in her chair, studying me. Camila, I need to be honest about what you're facing. Your in-laws have significant resources and probably expensive legal representation. This could be a long, difficult fight. I don't care how long it takes. They can't steal my life and get away with it. Good. That's the attitude we need. Sarah opened a file drawer and pulled out a thick folder. I want to show you something. This is documentation from a similar case one handled 2 years ago. Another family using probate. Manipulation to steal a widow's assets. The parallels were chilling. An elderly man died suddenly. His family immediately claimed his will had been updated. His widow found herself homeless and penniless, while the family claimed his estate. What happened? We proved the will was forged, exposed a pattern of elder abuse, and not only recovered the stolen assets, but secured additional damages for fraud. It took 18 months, but justice prevailed. 18 months? The thought of fighting for that long with a newborn seemed overwhelming. Sometimes longer. But we have advantages in your case that the other widow didn't have. Sarah pointed to David's letter. Your husband documented their pattern of behavior extensively. This isn't just about recovering your assets. We can potentially expose decades of fraud. She outlined our legal strategy. First, we'd file for emergency relief to restore my access to accounts and the house. Then we'd pursue criminal charges for fraud, elder abuse, and identity theft. Finally, we'd seek damages for the emotional and financial harm they'd caused. The emergency relief is crucial, Sarah explained. You have a newborn baby, and you've been made homeless through fraudulent means. A judge should grant immediate access to at least some of your resources. How quickly can we file? I can have the paperwork ready by tomorrow. We'll need affidavits from you, from Jake about David's intentions, and from your original lawyer confirming the real will. As if summoned by our conversation, my phone rang. Jake's name appeared on the screen. I'm with Sarah now, I answered. Good. Camila, I just got a call from Marcus. He wants to meet with us. Marcus? David's brother? Why? Sarah gestured for me to put the call on speaker. He said he has information about his family that we need to know. He sounded scared, actually. Said his mother doesn't know he's calling. Sarah leaned forward with interest. Where does he want to meet? Neutral location. That coffee shop where you and David first met. I looked at Sarah, who nodded. I'll come with you, she said. If Marcus is willing to testify against his family, it could change everything. We met Marcus 2 hours later. David's younger brother looked terrible pale, thin, with dark circles under his eyes. He kept looking over his shoulder as if expecting Patricia to appear. Marcus, I said carefully, what did you want to tell us? He pulled out a manila envelope, his hands shaking slightly. I found these in Mom's desk when I was helping her organize Dad's papers. I don't think she knows I took copies. Inside the envelope were bank statements, property transfers, and correspondence that painted an even darker picture than David's documentation had suggested. She's been doing this for years, Marcus said quietly. Not just to Grandma Rose, but to other family members too. Great-Aunt Margaret, Cousin Timothy when he was going through his divorce. Anyone who became vulnerable, she found a way to take advantage. Sarah studied the documents with growing amazement. This is a pattern of systematic fraud spanning at least 20 years. It gets worse, Marcus continued. She started planning to take your house the day after David died. I heard her on the phone with someone, a document forger, I think. She paid him to copy David's signature. You heard this? She thought I was asleep. I'd been staying there since the funeral, helping with arrangements. But late that night, she was in Dad's office making calls about changing locks, freezing accounts, forging documents. I felt vindicated but also sick. While I'd been grieving, trusting her support, Patricia had been systematically stealing my life. Why are you telling us this now? Sarah asked. Marcus looked at Emma, sleeping peacefully in her carrier. Because that's my niece. David loved Camila, and he'd be devastated if he knew what Mom was doing to his family. What about your father, Robert? Dad does whatever Mom tells him to do. He's scared of her too, honestly. She controls all their finances, all their decisions. He probably doesn't even know the full extent of what she's been doing. Sarah made notes rapidly. Marcus, would you be willing to testify to what you've told us? If it means stopping her from hurting anyone else, yes. You realize this will destroy your relationship with your parents. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, watching Emma sleep. My relationship with them has been built on lies and fear for years. Maybe it's time for the truth. After Marcus left, Sarah and I sat in the coffee shop planning our next moves. With his testimony and documentation, our case had become much stronger. We can file criminal charges now, Sarah said. Wire fraud, identity theft, elder abuse, this is serious federal crime territory. How long before we can get my house back? With this evidence? Days, not weeks. Emergency relief should be granted immediately once a judge sees the scope of the fraud. That evening, back in our temporary apartment, I fed Emma while looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Patricia was probably planning her next move, confident that she'd successfully stolen my life, that she'd made a crucial mistake. She'd underestimated a mother's determination to protect her child, and she'd never imagined that her own son would turn against her. David's real will was about to surface, and with it, the truth about the Brooks family's decades of deception. The Portland Police Bureau's Financial Crimes Unit occupied a dreary floor of a downtown government building. That Detective Lisa Rodriguez had the sharp intelligence of someone who'd built her career unraveling complex fraud schemes. Mrs. Brooks, she said, reviewing the stack of evidence Sarah and I had compiled. This is one of the most comprehensive fraud cases I've seen in 15 years. It had been 3 days since our meeting with Marcus, and Sarah had moved quickly to involve law enforcement. The evidence was overwhelming: forged signatures, manipulated bank records, a pattern of elder abuse spanning decades. What happens next? I asked, bouncing Emma gently as she fussed in her carrier. We're opening a formal investigation. Wire fraud, identity theft, elder financial abuse, these are serious federal crimes. Detective Rodriguez pulled out a thick file. Your husband's documentation is remarkable. It's like he was building a case against his own family. He was protecting us, I said quietly. He was smart to be concerned. We've started analyzing the bank records Marcus provided, and we're seeing transfers that violate multiple federal statutes. Sarah leaned forward. What about recovering Camila's assets immediately? The emergency court order should come through today. We've frozen the Brooks family accounts pending investigation, and we have a warrant to search their property. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This doesn't have to get ugly. Call me, P. I showed it to Detective Rodriguez, who made a note. Document everything. Any communication from Patricia Brooks could be evidence of witness intimidation. As if summoned by our conversation, her next text appeared. Think about what's best for Emma. Family should stay together. She's threatening my custody, I said, my voice shaking with anger. She's digging herself deeper into criminal territory, Detective Rodriguez replied. Keep your phone on record mode for any calls. The warrant search of the Brooks family home happened that afternoon. Detective Rodriguez called me with an update just as I was feeding Emma in our temporary apartment. We found the smoking gun, she said without preamble. Patricia Brooks kept detailed records of her forgeries, including practice sheets where she copied your husband's signature dozens of times. I nearly dropped my phone. She kept evidence of her own crimes. Narcissists often do. They're so confident. They won't get caught that they document their success. We also found correspondence with the document forger Marcus mentioned, and bank records showing payments to him. What about my house? The locks will be changed back tomorrow morning. You can go home. Home. The word felt surreal after everything that had happened. What about Patricia and Robert? They've been arrested. Patricia is being held without bail due to flight risk. She had a bag packed and tickets to the Cayman Islands. Robert is cooperating with the investigation. That evening, Sarah called with more updates. Robert Brooks is providing a full confession in exchange for reduced charges. He's been documenting Patricia's crimes for years, apparently out of fear she'd destroy him too if he didn't comply. He was afraid of his own wife. Financial abusers often control their entire family through fear and manipulation. Robert had no access to his own money, no knowledge of their real financial situation. He was as much a victim as anyone else. The scope of Patricia's crimes continued to expand. Detective Rodriguez discovered that she'd been systematically targeting vulnerable family members for 23 years, stealing over $1.2 million through various schemes. She started with small amounts from elderly relatives, Detective Rodriguez explained during our next meeting. Grocery money, utility payments. But she got bolder over time, eventually manipulating entire estates. How many victims? At least 12 family members that we've identified so far. Your case was just her most ambitious attempt, trying to steal an entire house and life from a grieving widow. The investigation revealed Patricia's methodology. She'd identify family members during vulnerable periods, illness, divorce, death, of a spouse, and position herself as a helpful caretaker. She'd gradually gain access to financial information, then begin manipulating accounts and documents. David's death presented the perfect opportunity, Detective Rodriguez said. A grieving widow with a newborn, isolated from support systems, completely dependent on family help. She thought she could complete the theft before you recovered enough to fight back. But David's preparations had sabotaged her timeline. His documentation, the hidden bank account, his letter to Jake, all of it had given me the tools to fight back before Patricia could complete her theft. We found something else, Detective Rodriguez said, pulling out an audio recording device. Patricia recorded most of her phone conversations, including the ones with the document forger. She was building an insurance policy against her accomplices. The recordings were damning. Patricia's voice, cold and calculating, discussing the best way to forge David's signature, how to freeze my accounts, even speculating about having me declared mentally unfit due to postpartum depression. She planned to have me committed, I asked, horrified. It was her backup plan if you didn't accept the living arrangement she offered. Mothers with newborns who claim their homes have been stolen, their accounts frozen. It's easy to make that look like postpartum psychosis if you control the narrative. I thought about my night in the motel, how overwhelmed and confused I'd felt, how Patricia's reasonable explanations had made me doubt my own reality. If I hadn't had David's documentation, if Jake hadn't supported me, if I hadn't found Sarah Patricia's plan might have worked. What happens to her now? She's looking at federal charges that could result in 20 to 30 years in prison. Wire fraud, identity theft, elder abuse. The sentences add up quickly. The bank records revealed the full extent of the stolen money. Patricia had been living a lifestyle far beyond what Robert's modest income could support, funded entirely by money stolen from vulnerable family members. She bought her house with money stolen from David's grandmother, Detective Rodriguez explained. The car, the jewelry, the expensive vacations, all purchased with stolen funds. Can the other victims recover their money? Most of it, yes. Federal asset forfeiture laws allow us to seize everything purchased with stolen funds. The victims will get a substantial portion of their losses back. Marcus called that evening, his voice shaky with emotion. I heard about the arrests. You okay? I'm getting my life back, I said, holding Emma close. Thank you for finding the courage to tell the truth. I should have done it years ago. I knew something was wrong, but I was scared of her. She was your mother, Marcus. It took incredible strength to go against her. She stopped being my mother the day she decided to steal from David's child," he said quietly. The investigation had revealed that David's suspicions went even deeper than I'd known. He'd been quietly documenting Patricia's behavior for over 2 years, building a case not just to protect me and Emma, but to stop her from victimizing anyone else. In his computer files, investigators found a folder labeled Family Protection, containing years of research into Patricia's financial crimes. He'd been planning to confront her after Emma was born, to demand restitution for all the family members she'd victimized. His death had interrupted that plan, but his documentation had become the foundation for bringing her to justice. As I prepared for our return home the next morning, I felt David's presence more strongly than I had since his death. He'd loved me enough to prepare for this exact scenario, to ensure that even in death he could still protect his family. Patricia Brooks had stolen money, property, and peace of mind from dozens of people over the years, but she'd made one fatal mistake. She'd tried to steal the future of a man who'd seen her coming and prepared for war. 2 weeks after Patricia's arrest, a package arrived at my office with no return address. Inside was a letter in David's handwriting that I'd never seen before, along with a USB drive and a note from someone named Helen Carter. "Mrs. Brooks," the note read, "I was David's grandmother Rose's caretaker during her final months. David asked me to hold this letter and give it to you if anything happened to him, and if his family ever caused you problems. I've been following the news about Patricia's arrest. I think it's time you knew the whole truth. Helen Carter." My hands trembled as I unfolded David's letter, dated just 2 weeks before his death. "My dearest Camila," it began, "if you're reading this, then my worst fears about my family have come true. What I'm about to tell you will be difficult to accept, but you need to understand the full scope of what you're fighting against." Letter detailed discoveries David had made about his grandmother's death, discoveries that suggested Patricia's crimes went far beyond financial fraud. "Grandma Rose didn't die of natural causes," David had written. "I've been investigating for months, and I believe my mother poisoned her to accelerate access to the inheritance." I nearly dropped the letter. Murder? The possibility seemed impossible, but David's tone was deadly serious. I found evidence of Grandma Rose receiving medications she wasn't prescribed, medications that would interact fatally with her heart condition. The pharmacy records show someone using her insurance to fill prescriptions for drugs that would appear to cause natural heart failure. The USB drive contained David's complete investigation pharmacy records, medical files, correspondence with private investigators. He'd been building a case not just for fraud, but for murder. I called Sarah immediately, my voice shaking as I read her David's letter over the phone. "Bring everything to my office immediately," she said. "This changes the entire scope of the case." An hour later, Sarah and I sat with Detective Rodriguez, reviewing David's evidence. The detective's expression grew darker with each document. "This is circumstantial, but compelling," she said finally. "Your husband documented a pattern of pharmaceutical purchases that could constitute premeditated murder. Can you prove it? We'll need to exhume the body for toxicology testing. But if David's evidence is accurate, we could be looking at murder charges in addition to everything else." The revelation explained so much about David's behavior in his final months, his urgency about the will, his warnings about trusting his family, his careful documentation of their crimes. He'd been living with the knowledge that his mother was not just a thief, but potentially a killer. "Why didn't he go to the police himself?" I asked. "He was probably trying to protect you and the baby," Detective Rodriguez said. "If he'd accused his mother of murder while you were pregnant, the stress could have endangered your health." Sarah found another crucial detail in David's files. "Look at this. He documented similar patterns around other family deaths. His grandfather's sudden illness, a great-uncle who died unexpectedly after updating his will in Patricia's favor. How many people do you think she killed?" We'll investigate every suspicious death in the family going back 20 years, Detective Rodriguez said grimly. This could be one of the largest serial killing cases in Oregon history. That evening, the news broke. Local television stations led with the story. Local woman arrested in multi-million-dollar fraud may be serial killer. Patricia's photo appeared on every channel. The composed woman I'd known replaced by an orange jumpsuit and hollow stare dot. My phone rang constantly, reporters wanting interviews. Distant family members expressing shock. Neighbors asking if I'd known I was living next to a potential serial killer. Marcus called, his voice broken. Did you see the news? I'm sorry, Marcus. I know this must be devastating. I keep thinking about all the family gatherings, all the relatives who died and left Mom money. Were any of those deaths natural? The police will investigate everything. You did the right thing by coming forward. I feel like I should have known, should have seen the signs. You were her son. You weren't supposed to be looking for signs that your mother was a killer. The investigation expanded rapidly. Patricia's cell was searched, revealing journals where she documented her victims' vulnerabilities, their financial assets, even their medication schedules. She kept trophies, Detective Rodriguez told me during an update meeting. Jewelry from victims, copies of their wills, even photographs from their funerals. This goes beyond greed into psychological pathology. The journals revealed Patricia's twisted justification for her crimes. She saw herself as the rightful heir to family wealth, entitled to accelerate inheritances that would eventually come to her anyway. In her mind, she wasn't stealing, she was collecting what was already hers. She writes about David like he was a business asset, Detective Rodriguez said, showing me excerpts from the journals. His marriage to you disrupted her long-term financial planning. She saw you and Emma as threats to her control over family resources. The most chilling entry was dated 3 days before David's death. D becoming too suspicious. May need to accelerate timeline. Accident would solve multiple problems. I stared at the page, the implications sinking in. You think she killed David too? We're investigating his accident with fresh eyes. The police report mentioned unusual mechanical damage that could suggest tampering. David's car was exhumed from the salvage yard where it had been stored. Forensic analysis revealed brake line, damage consistent with sabotage, small cuts that would cause gradual brake failure, especially dangerous in wet conditions. Your husband's death wasn't an accident, Detective Rodriguez told me a week later. Someone tampered with his brakes. Probably the night before the crash. The room spun around me. David had been murdered. My husband, Emma's father, had been killed by his own mother to facilitate her theft of our life. Can you prove it was Patricia? We found receipts in her belongings for automotive tools purchased 2 days before David's death, combined with the journal entries about accelerating the timeline. We have enough for murder charges. The media attention intensified. Patricia Brooks had become the subject of national news coverage, the wealthy suburban mother who'd allegedly killed her own son for money. Crime documentaries were already reaching out about telling her story, but for me, the revelation brought a strange sense of closure. David's warnings, his urgency about protecting me, his careful documentation, it all made sense now. He'd known his mother was dangerous, possibly even suspected she might try to harm him. He knew, I told Sarah as we prepared for Patricia's arraignment on the murder charges. Somehow, David knew she was capable of killing him. That's why he prepared so thoroughly, Sarah replied. Every document, every precaution, every safeguard he was trying to protect you from a woman he knew was capable of anything. The arraignment was a media circus. Patricia, in shackles and an orange jumpsuit, bore no resemblance to the composed woman who'd offered me sympathy casseroles just weeks before. She pleaded not guilty to all charges, but her lawyer looked like he was already planning a plea bargain. After the hearing, I stood on the courthouse steps holding Emma, surrounded by reporters asking how it felt to learn my mother-in-law had killed my husband. David loved his family despite their flaws, I said into the microphones. But he loved Emma and me more, and he died trying to protect us from a woman who saw people as assets to be managed, rather than human beings to be cherished. That night, I sat in our nursery, finally back in our real home, reading David's letter one more time. The man I'd married had lived his final months knowing his mother was a killer, carrying that burden alone to protect me and our unborn child. "Your daddy was a hero," I whispered to Emma as she slept in the crib David had assembled with his own hands. "He saved us, even after he was gone." Patricia Brooks had stolen money, property, and lives for decades. But she'd never understood the one thing that had ultimately defeated her: the power of genuine love to transcend even death itself. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, hand-delivered to my office by Patricia's attorney. Inside was a request that chilled me to the bone. Patricia wanted to meet with me privately before her trial began. "Absolutely not," Sarah said when I called her. "This woman killed your husband. She has nothing to say that you need to hear." But I couldn't stop thinking about the request. For months, I'd been fighting a shadow, an abstract enemy who'd stolen my life through legal manipulation. The woman who'd murdered David, who tried to steal Emma's future, wanted to face me directly. "I want to see her," I told Sarah during our next meeting. "Camila, that's exactly what she's hoping for. Narcissists need to maintain control, even from prison. This is probably an attempt to manipulate you, maybe, but I need to look her in the eye and tell her she failed." Detective Rodriguez was equally opposed to the meeting. "She's a psychopath who's killed multiple people. There's no telling what she might try to accomplish." But the more they argued against it, the more determined I became. Patricia had controlled the narrative of our relationship from the beginning: the helpful mother-in-law, the grieving grandmother, the reasonable family member trying to provide stability. I wanted her to see the woman she tried to destroy, holding the child she tried to steal. "If I do this, what safety precautions would be in place?" Detective Rodriguez sighed. "Maximum security meeting room, guards present, everything recorded. She'd be shackled and separated by bulletproof glass." "And I can terminate the meeting at any time?" "Absolutely." "But Camila, I really don't recommend this." 2 weeks later, I sat in the visiting room of the Multnomah County Jail, Emma sleeping peacefully in her carrier beside me. Through the thick glass barrier, I watched Patricia Brooks enter in shackles and an orange jumpsuit. The woman who'd once intimidated me with her perfectly composed appearance looked haggard, now grey roots showing in her dyed hair, deep lines. Around her eyes, an aura of defeat that no amount of manipulation could disguise. She picked up the phone on her side of the glass, and I reluctantly lifted mine. "Camila," she said, her voice still carrying that familiar tone of authority. "Thank you for coming." "I didn't come for you," I said quietly. "I came to make sure you understood that you lost." Her laugh was bitter. "Lost? Look around you, dear. I'm in prison. My husband has abandoned me. My sons won't take my calls. I've lost everything." "Good. But so have you," she continued, her voice taking on the manipulative tone I remembered. "David is still dead. You're still a single mother struggling to raise his child alone. Nothing you've done will bring him back." I looked down at Emma, who was waking up and looking around the harsh visiting room with curious eyes. "You're right. David is gone. But Emma and I are alive. We're safe. And we're free from you. That's more than you accomplished." "I could have given you stability," Patricia said, leaning forward against the glass. "A real family for Emma. Proper support. The Brooks legacy. Instead, you've chosen this, raising his child in isolation. Struggling financially." "We're not struggling," I interrupted. "My business is thriving. Emma is healthy and happy. And we have people who genuinely care about us. Something you never understood." Patricia's composure cracked slightly. "You have no idea what family means. What legacy means. Emma will grow up not knowing her father's heritage, not understanding her place in the world. Emma will grow up knowing she was loved enough that her father died trying to protect her from you. She understands that real family isn't about Money or control, it's about people who love you unconditionally. Love, Patricia spat. David's love for you destroyed our family. If he'd married someone more suitable, someone who understood family obligations, someone you could control, I said. Someone who wouldn't question when you started stealing from their children. For a moment, Patricia's mask slipped entirely, revealing the cold calculation underneath. Everything I did was for the family's benefit. David was too naive to understand that sometimes difficult decisions have to be made, like murdering your own son. David was going to destroy everything our family had built. He was going to expose private family matters, tear apart relationships that had taken generations to establish. The casual way she discussed murdering David, her own child, made my stomach turn. You killed him for money. I protected the family legacy from someone who didn't understand its importance. I stood up, Emma stirring in my arms. This conversation is over. Wait, Patricia said urgently, pressing her hand against the glass. I want to see Emma. She's my granddaughter. I have rights. You have no rights, I said firmly. You murdered her father. You tried to steal her home. You wanted to have me committed to an institution. You'll never see Emma again, and she never know your name. Patricia's face transformed with rage. You can't keep her from me forever. Family is family, and the courts will. The courts will be very interested in your opinion about family when you're on trial for murdering multiple family members. I interrupted. Goodbye, Patricia. I hope prison teaches you what David tried to, that love matters more than money. I turned to leave, but her voice followed me, high and desperate now. She asked about me someday. Children always want to know about their grandparents. You can't erase me from her life. I paused at the door and turned back. Emma will know about her grandmother. She know that David's mother loved money more than people, that she killed her own son for financial gain, and that she spent the rest of her life in prison because she chose greed over love. She understand exactly what kind of person you are. Patricia's screaming followed me down the hallway as guards moved to restrain her. The woman who'd tried to steal my life, who'd murdered my husband, who'd planned to destroy my family, she was exactly where she belonged, outside the jail. I sat in my car for several minutes, holding Emma close and processing what had just happened. The confrontation I dreaded had become something else entirely, a final acknowledgement that Patricia Brooks had lost everything, while Emma and I had everything that mattered. It's over, sweetheart, I whispered to Emma, who was looking up at me with David's serious dark eyes. She can't hurt us anymore. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. How did it go? She showed me exactly who she is, I replied. And I showed her exactly who I am. We're done with her forever. That evening, I filed a restraining order ensuring Patricia could never contact Emma or me again. The woman who'd tried to erase me from my own life had instead erased herself from ours. She'd murdered my husband, stolen my home, and tried to destroy my future. But sitting in that prison visiting room, I'd seen the truth. Patricia Brooks was a hollow, desperate woman who'd sacrificed everything meaningful for money and control. Emma and I had love, security, and a future full of possibilities. Patricia had a cell and the knowledge that her crimes had accomplished nothing except her own destruction. In the end, love had won over greed, and family had triumphed over manipulation. David's protection had worked exactly as he'd planned. 6 months after Patricia's arrest, I sat in the front row of a federal courtroom holding Emma, now a chubby, alert baby who smiled at everyone and had just started sitting up on her own. Patricia's trial had drawn national attention. The suburban mother, who'd killed her own son, was being tried for multiple murders spanning 2 decades. Sarah sat beside me, a thick folder of evidence on her lap. Over the months of preparation, we'd uncovered the full scope of Patricia's crimes. 7 confirmed murders, 12 cases of financial fraud, and systematic manipulation of vulnerable family members stretching back 23 years. Are you ready for this? Sarah asked as we waited for the proceedings to begin. I've been ready for months, I replied, adjusting Emma's dress. She was wearing yellow David's favorite color, and a tiny necklace with his initials that Jake had given her. The prosecution's case was overwhelming. Patricia had kept meticulous records of her crimes, apparently viewing them as business successes, worthy of documentation. Phone recordings, journal entries, financial records, and physical evidence painted a clear picture of premeditated murder for financial gain. Marcus took the stand on the second day, his testimony devastating to any hope Patricia might have had for sympathy. He described years of watching his mother manipulate vulnerable relatives, his growing suspicions about family deaths, and his final decision to expose her crimes. "Did you ever suspect your mother was capable of murder?" the prosecutor asked. Marcus looked directly at Patricia, who sat stone-faced at the defense table. "I suspected she was capable of anything if it meant getting money. But I never imagined she'd kill David. He was her son. What changed your mind?" "Finding her practice sheets, where she'd copied David's signature hundreds of times, realizing that she'd planned to steal everything from his widow and baby daughter. That's when I understood that money mattered more to her than her own children." Robert testified next, his confession filling in details about Patricia's methods. He described being afraid of his own wife, living under constant surveillance and control, watching her target vulnerable family members. "Why didn't you report her crimes earlier?" the prosecutor asked. "Because I was terrified of her," Robert said quietly. "She controlled everything: our money, our social connections, our family relationships. She'd made it clear that crossing her would mean losing everything, including potentially my life." The forensic evidence was damning. Patricia's fingerprints on automotive tools used to sabotage David's brakes. Pharmacy records showing she'd purchased medications used to kill her mother-in-law. DNA evidence linking her to the deaths of 3 other family members. But the most compelling evidence came from Patricia's own words. Hours of recorded phone calls where she discussed her crimes with chilling detachment. The old woman was becoming suspicious. Her voice played through the courtroom speakers, discussing David's grandmother. I had to accelerate the timeline. A little extra digitalis in her evening pills, and the problem resolved itself. I held Emma closer as Patricia's voice continued, clinical and cold as she described ending human lives for money. Emma babbled softly, oblivious to the horror being described around her. On the 4th day, I was called to testify. Sarah had prepared me extensively, but walking to the witness stand with the entire courtroom watching felt surreal. Patricia stared at me with undisguised hatred as I was sworn in. "Mrs. Brooks," the prosecutor began, "please tell the court about your relationship with the defendant." I described meeting Patricia through David, her initial kindness, and the gradual increase in controlling behavior. The jury listened intently as I explained how she'd manipulated my grief, forged documents, and stolen my home while I was recovering from childbirth. "Did you ever suspect she was capable of murder?" "David warned me not to trust his family with legal matters," I said, looking directly at Patricia. "I thought he was being paranoid. I realized now he was trying to protect Emma and me from someone he knew was dangerous." The defense attorney's cross-examination was brutal but ineffective. He tried to paint me as a vindictive daughter-in-law seeking revenge, but the evidence was too overwhelming to discount. "Isn't it true that you stood to gain financially from these accusations against Mrs. Brooks?" "The only thing I wanted was to get my life back," I replied. "To raise my daughter in the home her father chose for her, with the resources he worked to provide. Patricia Brooks stole those things and killed my husband to cover her crimes." The trial lasted 2 weeks. Expert witnesses testified about Patricia's psychological profile, a narcissistic personality disorder combined with psychopathic traits that had allowed her to kill family members without remorse. During closing arguments, the prosecutor displayed photos of Patricia's victims: David's grandmother, his grandfather, several great-aunts and uncles, and finally, David himself. Emma's photo appeared last, labeled, "Intended victim theft of inheritance." Patricia Brooks spent decades perfecting the art of murdering people who trusted her, the prosecutor said. She killed her own son when he threatened to expose her crimes. She tried to steal everything from his widow and infant daughter. This isn't about money, it's about a woman who saw other human beings as obstacles to be eliminated. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood with obvious gravity. On the charge of first-degree murder in the death of David Brooks, how do you find? Guilty. The same verdict was read for 6 other murder charges, 12 counts of fraud, and additional charges for identity theft and elder abuse. Patricia showed no emotion as her life sentence was pronounced multiple life terms without possibility of parole. After the sentencing, I stood on the courthouse steps with Emma, surrounded by reporters and supporters. Marcus approached me, his eyes red from crying. "I'm sorry," he said simply. "I'm sorry for what she did to your family." "You stopped her from hurting anyone else," I replied. "David would be proud of your courage." "What happens now?" "Now Emma and I go home and live the life David wanted us to have." That evening, I sat in our garden with Emma on my lap, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. The house felt peaceful in a way it hadn't since David's death. The weight of secrets and threats finally lifted. My phone buzzed with a text from Jake. "Justice served. David would be proud." I looked down at Emma, who was examining a flower with intense concentration. She had David's serious expression when she was thinking, his dark eyes that seemed to see everything. "Your daddy kept us safe," I whispered to her. "Even when he couldn't be here, he made sure we'd be okay." The trial had officially ended Patricia's reign of terror, but for me, it represented something more important: the final victory of love over greed, family over manipulation, truth over deception. Patricia Brooks would spend the rest of her life in prison, having traded everything meaningful for money and control. She'd lost her family, her freedom, and her legacy. Emma and I had everything that mattered: security, love, and a future full of possibilities. The woman who tried to erase us from our own lives had instead erased herself from ours completely. David's protection had worked exactly as he'd planned, and justice had finally prevailed. 1 year after Patricia's conviction, I stood in the doorway of our home office, watching Emma play with blocks on the floor, while I worked on a new branding project. At 14 months old, she was walking confidently, babbling constantly, and had developed David's habit of studying things with intense concentration before making decisions. "Mama," she said, holding up a red block for my inspection. "That's beautiful, sweetheart," I replied, saving my work and joining her on the floor. The house felt truly like home again. I'd had it blessed by a priest, rearranged the furniture to erase any lingering traces of Patricia's presence, and filled it with new memories. Emma's toys were scattered in every room, her laughter echoed through the halls, and the weight of fear that had oppressed us for months had finally lifted. My graphic design business had not only recovered but thrived. Word of my story had spread through the local business community, and many clients specifically sought me out because they admired my resilience. I'd hired 2 part-time employees and was considering expanding into web design. "You're a survivor," my newest client, a women's shelter director, had told me during our initial meeting. That's exactly the kind of strength we want associated with our brand. The financial restitution from Patricia's assets had been substantial. The FBI had seized everything purchased with stolen money: the house, cars, jewelry, investments, and distributed it among her victims. My share, combined with David's life insurance and our existing savings, had given Emma and me true financial security. But more importantly, we'd built a new support network. Jake visited every few weeks, bringing his girlfriend Sarah to meet Emma and always staying for dinner. Marcus had become a regular presence in our lives, determined to be the uncle Emma deserved despite his mother's crimes. "She has David's eyes," Marcus said during one visit, watching Emma stack blocks with methodical precision. "But she's got your determination. She's going to need it," I replied. "Someday she have questions about her father's family, about, What happened to her grandmother? We'll help her understand, Marcus said quietly, that love matters more than money, and that sometimes the family you choose is more important than the family you're born into. Dr. Chun had become a close friend, often stopping by to check on Emma's development and my emotional well-being. She'd helped me process the trauma of Patricia's manipulation and find healthy ways to discuss David's death with Emma as she grew older. Children are remarkably resilient, she'd assured me during one of our conversations. Emma will grow up, knowing she was loved enough that her father died protecting her. That's a powerful foundation for a healthy life. The house itself had been transformed. I'd converted David's home office into a playroom for Emma, filled with educational toys and books. The garden had been expanded with child-friendly plants and a small sandbox where Emma could dig and explore. Every room held evidence of our new life together. Most significantly, I'd established the David Brooks Foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated to protecting vulnerable families from financial predators. Using my design skills and the contacts I'd made through the legal process, we'd helped dozens of families recognize and escape from manipulative situations. You're turning your trauma into purpose, Sarah, my lawyer, had observed during one of our foundation meetings. David would be incredibly proud. The foundation had become my passion project. We provided legal resources, emotional support, and practical assistance to people facing family manipulation. Our first major case had been helping an elderly man whose daughter was stealing his social security checks, a situation that reminded me powerfully of Patricia's methods. Emma had her own relationship with David's memory. I'd filled her room with photos of him, told her stories about their brief time together, and made sure she understood that her daddy had loved her even before she was born. She'd begun reaching for his pictures and making happy sounds when she saw them. Dada, she'd said one morning, pointing to a photo of David holding her in the hospital. It was her first clear word besides Mama, and I'd cried with joy. The legal system had worked, but the real victory was in the life we'd built afterward. Emma was healthy, happy, and surrounded by people who genuinely cared about her well-being. My business was thriving, our home was secure, and we'd created something Patricia could never have understood: a family based on love rather than control. One evening, as I tucked Emma into her crib, she reached up and touched my face with her small hand. "Mama happy?" she said in her clear, small voice. "Yes, baby," I whispered, kissing her forehead. "Mama is very happy." Through the nursery window, I could see the garden where David had planned to teach Emma about plants and growth. Soon she'd be old enough to help me tend the flowers, to learn about nurturing life instead of destroying it. We had everything Patricia had tried to steal: security, love, and hope for the future. But more than that, we had something she'd never possessed: the peace that comes from building a life based on genuine care rather than manipulation and control. Emma fell asleep holding a stuffed elephant Jake had brought her, her face peaceful and content. Looking at her, I saw not just David's features but also the strength and resilience that would carry her through whatever challenges lay ahead. We'd survived the worst that greed and manipulation could inflict. Now we were building something beautiful in its place, a life worthy of the love David had sacrificed everything to protect. 2 years after the trial, I stood in the kitchen of our home, preparing breakfast while Emma sat in her high chair, chattering excitedly about everything she could see. At 2 years old, she was a whirlwind of energy and curiosity, with David's serious dark eyes and my stubborn determination. "Mama bird," she exclaimed, pointing toward the window where a robin was perched on the feeder David had installed before she was born. "Yes, sweetheart, that's a robin," I said, cutting up strawberries for her breakfast. "Remember what sound robins make?" Emma attempted a chirping sound that made me laugh. Her vocabulary was expanding daily, and she'd recently started stringing together short sentences that revealed her growing personality. The morning routine had become my favorite part of each day. Emma would wake up singing to herself, then call for me with delighted shouts of "Mama up." When I'd enter her room, She'd greet me with the kind of pure joy that reminded me why every struggle had been worth it. "Today we're going to see Dr. Chun," I told her as I wiped strawberry juice from her chin. "She wants to see how big you've gotten." "Dr. Chun nice," Emma said solemnly, which was her highest compliment. The pediatric appointment was routine, but Dr. Chun had become more than Emma's doctor. She was a trusted friend who'd guided us through the most difficult period of our lives. "She's developing beautifully," Dr. Chun said, watching Emma stack blocks with methodical precision. "Her fine motor skills are excellent. Her language development is ahead of schedule, and her emotional attachment patterns are very healthy. Sometimes I worry about the trauma of that first year," I admitted. "The stress I was under, the instability, Camila." "Look at her," Dr. Chun interrupted gently. "She's confident, curious, and securely attached to you. Whatever difficulties you faced, you provided her with exactly what she needed: consistent love and protection." Emma had indeed grown into a remarkable child. She was fearless about exploring new environments, friendly with strangers, but always checking to make sure I was nearby, and showed an early aptitude for problem-solving that reminded me constantly of David. "She's going to be brilliant," Jake had observed during his last visit. "David would be so proud of the little person she's becoming." The David Brooks Foundation had grown beyond anything I'd imagined. We now had a small staff, partnerships with legal aid organizations across the state, and a resource center that helped hundreds of families each year. My personal story had become a powerful tool for raising awareness about family financial abuse. "You've turned your pain into purpose," one of our clients had told me after we'd helped her escape from a manipulative adult son who was stealing her pension. "Knowing you survived something similar gave me hope that I could too." Emma often accompanied me to foundation events, charming donors and volunteers with her bright personality. She'd become our unofficial mascot, representing the innocent victims that financial predators often target. "She doesn't know yet that her story helped save other families," I told Marcus during one of our weekly dinners. "That someday she'd understand that her father's love protected more than just us." Marcus had become Emma's devoted uncle, bringing her books and toys, taking her to parks, and providing the stable male presence I'd worried about her missing. He'd moved to Portland after the trial, determined to build a new life away from the toxic legacy of his mother's crimes. "I want her to know that the Brooks family isn't just about what Mom did," he'd said during one of our conversations. "David was good, and Robert is trying to rebuild his life. She comes from love, not just tragedy." Robert had indeed begun the slow process of healing. He'd moved to a small apartment across town, working part-time at a hardware store, and attending therapy to process decades of psychological abuse. His relationship with Emma was tentative but growing. He'd send her cards on holidays and occasionally joined us for Sunday dinners. "I failed to protect David from his mother," he told me during one visit. "But I won't fail Emma. She deserves to know her grandfather as he really is, not as the man fear made him become." The healing process had been gradual but steady. I'd attended therapy myself, processing the trauma of David's death and Patricia's manipulation. Emma had been assessed by child development specialists to ensure the early instability hadn't affected her emotional growth. "Children are remarkably resilient," my therapist had assured me. "Emma experienced consistent love and care from you during her most formative period. That's what will shape her personality and emotional health." One evening, as I was tucking Emma into bed, she looked up at me with those serious dark eyes that were so much like David's. "Mama, where Daddy?" she asked. It was a question she'd been asking more frequently as her understanding of the world expanded. I'd been preparing for this moment, knowing it would come as she grew older. "Daddy is in heaven," I said gently, sitting on the edge of her bed. "He loved you very much, even before you were born, but he had to go to heaven before you could meet him." "Daddy see me?" she asked, pointing to a photo of David on her nightstand. "Daddy watches over you every day," I replied. "He's so proud of what a smart, kind little girl you're becoming." Emma reached up and touched my face with her small hand. "Mama sad?" "Sometimes Mama feels sad because she misses Daddy," I said honestly. "But mostly Mama feels happy because I have you." "Emma make Mama happy?" "Emma makes Mama very, very happy," I confirmed, kissing her forehead. She smiled and settled back into her pillow. "Mama sing?" I sang her the lullaby David used to hum when I was pregnant, the same melody he'd planned to share with her. Emma's eyes fluttered closed, and she whispered, "Love you, Mama." "Love you too, sweetheart," I whispered back. Later that evening, I sat in the garden David had planned, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Emma was healthy, happy, and surrounded by people who genuinely cared about her well-being. My business was thriving. Our foundation was helping families across the state. And we'd built a life that honored David's memory while creating something entirely our own. The little girl sleeping upstairs would grow up knowing she was loved enough that her father died protecting her. She'd understand that real family was about loyalty and care, not control and manipulation. And she'd carry forward the legacy of love that had triumphed over greed and fear. David's sacrifice had not been in vain. We were not just surviving, we were thriving, creating ripples of healing that extended far beyond our own lives. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and new reasons to be grateful for the life we'd built together. But tonight, in the peaceful garden of our home, I felt the deep satisfaction of knowing that love had indeed conquered all. 3 years after Patricia's conviction, I knelt in the garden beside Emma, now a vibrant 3-year-old with dirt under her fingernails, and David's determined expression as she carefully planted marigold seeds in the memorial garden we'd created together. "These flowers are for Daddy," I explained, helping her cover the seeds with soil. "They'll grow bright and beautiful, just like his love for us." "Daddy likes flowers?" Emma asked, her small hands patting the earth with gentle precision. "Daddy loved all growing things," I said. "He would have loved to garden with you." The memorial garden had been Emma's idea, in the way that 3-year-old ideas emerge through questions, observations, and an intuitive understanding that some spaces should be special. We'd planted it in the corner of our yard where David had planned to build a greenhouse, using flowers that bloomed in every season, so Emma could tend them year-round. "Mama, look." Emma pointed to a butterfly landing on the nearby roses. "Pretty butterfly." "Very pretty," I agreed, watching her wonder at the simple magic of nature. This was exactly the kind of moment David had dreamed of sharing with her quiet discoveries in the garden, teaching her about growth and beauty and the cycles of life. The David Brooks Foundation had become a statewide resource, helping over 500 families escape financial manipulation in the past year alone. I'd been invited to speak at conferences, had testified before legislative committees about elder abuse, and had written articles for legal journals about recognizing family fraud. "Your story has literally saved lives," Sarah had told me during our most recent board meeting. "The warning signs you've identified have become standard training materials for social workers and legal aid attorneys." Emma often accompanied me to foundation events, where she'd charm donors and volunteers with her bright personality and innocent questions. She'd become our youngest advocate, representing the children who suffered when families were destroyed by greed. "She's going to change the world," Jake had observed during his last visit, watching Emma organize her toys with the methodical precision she'd inherited from David. "She's got his intelligence and your courage." My graphic design business had evolved beyond anything I'd imagined. I now specialized in nonprofits and social justice organizations, using my skills to help causes that mattered. The trauma of fighting for my life had crystallized my values. I wanted to spend my professional energy on work that made a difference. "You're exactly where you're supposed to be," Dr. Chen had told me during Emma's recent checkup. "You've turned your pain into purpose and created something beautiful from something terrible." Emma had grown into a remarkable child, confident, curious, and surprisingly wise about complex emotions. She understood that her daddy was in heaven, that some people in the world were unkind, and that love was stronger than fear. "Mama Brave," she'd announced one morning, apparently out of nowhere. "What makes you say that, sweetheart?" "You make bad people go away," she'd said matter-of-factly. "You keep Emma safe." Her emotional intelligence astounded me. She'd comfort me when I was sad, celebrate enthusiastically when I was happy, and somehow understood that our small family was complete exactly as it was. Marcus had become her devoted uncle, taking her to children's museums, reading her stories, and providing the stable male presence I'd worried about her missing. He'd found love with a kindergarten teacher named Lisa, and they were planning to marry next spring. "Emma's going to be our flower girl," he'd announced during Sunday dinner. "She's already planning her dress." "Princess dress," Emma had added emphatically. Robert had slowly rebuilt his relationship with us, attending birthday parties and holidays, bringing Emma thoughtful gifts and sharing stories about David's childhood. The grandfather she knew was gentle and kind, nothing like the man who'd been controlled by Patricia's manipulation. "I want her to know that David came from love," he told me recently. That despite everything that happened, he grew up knowing he was cherished. The house itself had been transformed into something uniquely ours. Emma's artwork covered the refrigerator, her toys filled every corner, and the sound of her laughter echoed through rooms that had once felt haunted by tragedy. "Home," Emma said one evening, patting the wall as we walked through the hallway. "Emma's home." "Yes, sweetheart," I'd replied. "This is our home." That afternoon, as Emma napped, I sat in the memorial garden with a cup of tea and David's final letter, the one I'd never shown anyone else, the one he'd written just for me. "My dearest Camila," it began, "by the time you read this, I'll be gone. But my love for you and our child will continue forever. I know the road ahead will be difficult, but I also know you're strong enough to handle whatever comes." The letter continued with practical advice, emotional support, and predictions about Emma's personality that had proven remarkably accurate. But the final paragraph always made me cry. "Build a life worthy of the love we shared. Show our daughter that real family is about loyalty and care, not control and manipulation. And remember that every happy moment you create, every laugh our child shares, every act of kindness you show others, it's all part of the legacy we built together. I'll be watching over you both, proud of the amazing life you're creating." Emma stirred in her bedroom, and I heard her calling for me. I folded the letter carefully and went inside, where she was sitting up in bed with her favorite stuffed elephant. "Mama, I dreamed about flowers," she said sleepily. "What kind of flowers?" "Happy flowers, growing everywhere." I picked her up and carried her to the window overlooking our memorial garden. The marigolds we'd planted that morning were all ready, showing tiny green shoots, and the roses were blooming in brilliant colors. "Look, sweetheart," I said, pointing to the garden. "Daddy's flowers are growing." Emma pressed her face against the glass, studying the garden with David's serious concentration. "Daddy happy?" "Daddy is very happy," I said with certainty. "He's happy because we're happy." That evening I updated my journal, a practice I'd started during the trial, and continued as a way to process our healing. Tonight's entry was simple. "Emma planted flowers for David today. She's growing as beautifully as anything in our garden. We're not just surviving anymore, we're thriving. We're creating the life David died to protect. And every day is proof that love really does conquer all." As I turned off the lights and checked on Emma one last time, I felt the deep peace that came from knowing we'd made it through the darkness into something bright and beautiful. The woman who'd tried to destroy us was serving life in prison, while we were building a life full of love, purpose, and hope. Emma slept peacefully in her crib, surrounded by photos of the father who'd loved her enough to die protecting her future. In the morning, she'd wake up ready to explore the world, confident in her safety and secure in the knowledge that she was cherished beyond measure. We'd survived the worst that greed and hatred could inflict. Now we were creating something that would honor David's memory for generations to come, a family built on love, a foundation that helped others, and a little girl who would grow up knowing that real strength came from caring for others rather than controlling them. The memorial garden would bloom for years to come, a living testament to the love that had triumphed over everything Patricia Brooks had tried to destroy. In the end, that's what mattered most, not the money she'd stolen, or the lives she'd taken, but the love that had survived and flourished despite her best efforts to destroy it. David's protection had worked exactly as he'd planned. We were safe, we were loved, and we were free.